all know that Pathfinder Ministries originally was from grade 5 through 10. And the North America division in many places, that is extended clear through to college. And that is because of the junior teen program that we have for our young people. So it's very important that we train our young people to be leaders and to love the Lord. And the focus of the ministry, as you can see, is to develop the faith of children and teens in Jesus Christ and provide them with lifelong mentors. Can you think of some mentors you've had through the years? I look back and think of some of my mentors, and they include Pathfinder leaders through the years, including our current one, Pastor Tracy Wood from the North American Division. Can this slide come on? There you go. I think one of the things that we forget sometimes, we get so involved in Pathfinder Club that we forget it's a club ministry. If we're just having fun and doing all the honors and going camping, but we're not making a ministry, we're doing free babysitting, and that isn't what it's all about. So let's, I wish I could pass this on to the next one myself. The next part of the slide. There we go, Proverbs 22:6. I think we all know that, and very possibly there are some of you like me that are praying for our young people that hope that even though they're getting older, that they will come back to the Lord and be part of the Lord. Next. It's very important that we realize the purpose of pathfinding. We want to create an atmosphere of love and acceptance. Your Pathfinder Club might be the only place that they feel loved. We want to provide them with church-centered recreational program, something that's fun, and they don't have to go out and be with the world to have a good time. We want to help them develop character and citizenship. We don't want them to be part of the problem. We want them to be able to help with the problems of the world. We want to work for the salvation of each Pathfinder. Do you think of that as you're working with your young people and all the problems in your club and what's going on? And do you really think about the fact that they need to know that Jesus loves them and they need to learn the love of Jesus? And we want them to appreciate nature. Let's go on to our next one. Nature, everybody says is God's second book. I disagree. I think it's his first book. I love nature and the things that God's provided for us. Let me keep going on this. The honors were developed to teach Pathfinder skills and hobbies to make life meaningful, fun. Not something to do in an hour, but something that they learn to do, and it becomes a hobby for them. Keeping physical fit. As adults, some of us really struggle with that and put on the weight gains and stuff, and we're not as physically fit as we should be. If you're working in Pathfinders and hiking with them and involved with them, it's more apt to be physically fit. Next, opportunities for leadership. The TLT program is good for that. I've often said I've led in Pathfinders for more than 50 years now, and I've never done opening ceremony. My teens did opening ceremonies. Give them opportunities for leadership. We want to help them develop balanced physical, mental, social, and spiritual life. So all those parts are part of our Pathfinder Club, our club ministry. Next, to guide youth into active mission service. When I was first in Pathfinders, what did we do for mission service? We sang at a stinky old rest home every Sabbath afternoon. There was no real mission service. We didn't feel it was a mission. When my kids were in Pathfinders, our mission was not just to sing there, but to help the older people. Our Pathfinders would help them by reading to them or getting them fresh water or working with the administration so they'd be part of it. Of course, going on mission trips, local and foreign, is all something that's very important. We want to teach them service, and they love the service. Next. Young people love to be involved. Were you once a Pathfinder? Were you once an adventurer? Are you an invested master guide? Did you know we have a mission statement? I often hear people describe Pathfinders as a scouting type organization. Don't say that. It's not. It's an organization of the Seventh-day Adventist Church for our young people and other young people. You don't have to be a member of the church to belong. But it's challenging with experiences of nature, activities, relationship with Christ, a sense of achievement and responsibility. We're not like scouting, though I will admit Pathfinders came out of scouting. Thank you. Next. What are our goals? For Pathfinders to accept Jesus Christ as a personal Savior and Lord. Do you have baptismal classes in your Pathfinder Club? Do you talk about the Lord on your campouts? Reflect, internalize Christian values to mature decision-making and behavior. Mature as they can be at that age, and let's hope we're mature too. Yes? Exhibit, you can read that. I was trying to get something that's in my way out of there and it won't leave. We want to exhibit in our lives.
Yeah, exhibit the
Christ-like character,
true holiness and fullness of stature of Christ.
Yeah. If we don't exhibit that, how do we expect them to learn that? So you have to remember that. And I think there's one more there. Demonstrate leadership skills, enable and empower to become full partners. We want them to be totally active in service, supporting the mission of the church. Be involved. Maybe what you're doing is cleaning up around the church because it's a mess and nobody's taking care of it. And your Pathfinders can do that. Whatever they're doing, you're supporting and encouraging them to become citizens and be like Christ. Next. Oops. What specific ways staff can meet the goals and objectives of Pathfinder Club ministry? Look specifically at the verbs, action words of the goals and objectives. So what ways can staff help meet these goals?
I guess you could have them actively in a Bible study, I guess.
Good.
Have Pathfinders practice what they learn by participating in their church. Plan church activities. Be a friend to them, empower them, and let them know that people care. By training others to be a good example at the time and be aware that the Pathfinders are looking up on us. They can invite friends outside of church through praying together with them. Encourage active witnessing.
You know, before I go on to this, I just want to make one comment on what leaders can do. As adults, my father was one that mentored this so well. He knew all the names of all the kids in our church, and we don't have a small church here in Medford, Oregon. He knew their names. He talked to them. Unlike some adults, and hopefully none of you are part of this, but when kids are noisy, you turn around and give them a little dirty look, or you give them this, oh, help look because they've got purple hair or their crack is showing or whatever it is. Don't be that way. The statistics are 85% of the young people that you call by name and say, oh, Tom, I'm so glad you're in Sabbath school. Oh, Jane, I'm glad you came to church today. You're looking so nice. Thank you for being here. If you just connect with them, 85% of those young people will stay in the church. That means if you give them dirty looks and ignore them, 85% are not going to be in the church. That really puts a heavy burden on us, doesn't it, as adults? Okay, history of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. If we can see, yeah, thank you. We're only going to touch on a little bit of it because there's so many stories and so many things to tell. But if you don't have it, you need to get the Pathfinder story. It's available at Advent Source. And the Pathfinder story that was written by Elder Holbrook when he was in as the world Pathfinder leader, it keeps adding to it, and we keep updating as we get new information. So that's an important thing that you need to have and read so that you understand. Why do you need to know our history? Because as Ellen White said, if we don't know our history and we don't know how God has led, how can we help our young people learn? Next. Our next slide is the AY story, and we have a picture of it here. It has been updated recently, and so the AY story that we have now, I'll show it to you, has a different cover, the brand new cover, and it's been updated also. So we're trying to, as we get information from around the world, we're trying to keep updating this information, but that's really exciting to learn how youth ministry began around the world. Next. So the beginnings of the youth work go back a long time. I'm sure you know that Ellen White was only 17 when God gave her her first vision, and way before that, she was really dedicated to the Lord. And she and her family were disfellowshipped from the Methodist Church because of their beliefs of the second coming and because they were talking about it. But young people can do so many things for the Lord. Next. And her husband, James, which of course wasn't her husband at first, she was Ellen Gould Harmon. When she married James, he was only 21 when he began to preach. And that's pretty young to think about it. And if you start reading the history of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, you're going to see many, many of their pioneers were very young when they started and dedicated their lives to the Lord. So James started the youth instructor because Ellen encouraged him. Can you imagine being married to Ellen White?
Yeah, that sounds good, Mommy.
Men, as you're thinking about it, you know how your wife so often will say something to you like, you know, you need to do such and such, and you sort of give her the look and like, okay, dear. Well, can you imagine being married to Ellen White when she would say, James, the Lord has shown me that you should do such and such? I think it would be quite a challenge. But Ellen received the word from the Lord that they should have materials for young people. Next. And so she encouraged James to start the youth instructor. And the youth instructor was for all ages. There was nothing before 1852 for young people. There was nothing at all. So there were stories for young people, but by the way, the adults loved it too. And there was a section in it that was the children's page. So it was all there was for many, many years that young people could hear the stories about how God has led. Next. So we're going to talk about teens that work together. Luther Warren and Harry Finner were teens that felt their peers were not, they're not very spiritual. They're just goofing off. And so they really were concerned about it. And one day they stopped as they were walking along from one farm to the other working. And they talked about what could they do to help their peers. And they knelt down and prayed, and God gave them the idea to have meetings. I showed a picture here of Luther Warren, of the book Luther Warren by Sharon Boucher, and I know it's out of print, but if you have an opportunity to borrow that from someone or to maybe a church library has it and read it, we need to know the history of how this all began. Next. So in 1879, Luther and Harry prayed alongside the road and asked God to please help them how to know what to do. And they started the first Young People's Society, and actually they met together in Luther's upstairs bedroom at first. And then when the girls joined them, they met in the family home and then in the church. Older generations supported them. Just remember to be supportive. Just because it's a new idea doesn't mean it's bad. Just because the young people thought of it doesn't mean it's bad. And God blessed these young people. Our first issue of Little Friend wasn't until July 1890. Now you probably think, well, what's that have to do with Pathfinders? I don't suppose there's very many Pathfinders that are Seventh-day Adventists that didn't start reading the Little Friends or having it read to them way back when. But I just wanted to give an idea that from 1852, there was nothing for the younger ones except that little bit of children's page in the youth instructor. 1890, Little Friend came on the scene. And that again was encouraged by Ellen White. You know, Ellen and James had boys and they knew what they needed. And Meade McGuire started a Young People's Society in 1890 in Wisconsin. And Meade went on to be a field secretary. He traveled for the Missionary Volunteer Department starting in 1912 and helping young people to know what they needed. 1892, Ellen White wrote from Melbourne, Australia, and she is talking for a definite work for young people. She knew how important it was, and God showed her what was important for young people. Next. Just trying to give you a little basic. In Australia, also, Arthur Grosvenor Daniels began a junior society, and they, you know, 1892, they didn't know what it was called yet, but they called them junior societies. They had meetings for young people, very important meetings. Next. And Luther Warren, who had grown up and gotten married, started what he called Sunshine Band for young people. Luther became an evangelist and influenced the lives of thousands of young people through the years. He was really a missionary for God. And remember, he started that as a teenager. Next. The General Conference saw what was going on. They saw that there were all these societies starting up and they figured that they better do something about it. So they asked Flora Plummer if she would lead out. And she was head of the Sabbath School department, but she took on the youth ministry and started encouraging people. And it really, really grew. The youth meetings sprung up in many, many other places. Next. Harvest Ingathering. Did you ever go in-gathering? Jasper Wayne began the in-gathering in 1903, and actually it was all by accident, only I don't think it was. I think the Lord provided it, but he sold the Signs of the Times and gave money for missions. And for some reason, the Signs of the Times, the second batch was sent to him and he had all these extras and he sold them. And he talked to Ellen White about it and shared this with her. And she was really excited and asked her to bring it to the General Conference session. Next. There it is. And the youth work grew. Their goals were leading young people to Jesus, teaching youth to share their faith. Very, very important goals. And your goal as a Pathfinder leader should be the same. The General Conference finally decided in 1907 to create a Young People's Department. Have you ever heard of the name? Seventh-day Adventist Young People's Society of Missionary Volunteers. Can you guess why we called it MV? That's a big name. There's the first MV emblem that we've ever found. Next. I'm sorry, I can't click it myself. Milton Earl Kern was asked to be the first leader for the Missionary Volunteer Department, and he did a very good job. He was also at the same time a teacher at Lincoln College, at college in Lincoln, Nebraska, and he also traveled the world and shared MV. I don't know how he did all the things he did, but it seems like some of our pioneer leaders were energized to do so much more than we seem to do today. Next. The first junior secretary, and you know, they called them secretaries in those days instead of associates or instead of directors, but it was Anna Matilda Erickson, and she was wonderful and did so many things to encourage the MV department, the missionary volunteers. And I just showed this picture. It just happens to be the only one I have of her, but this was taken in Inter-American Division after she married widower Pastor Andros, and they went to the Inter-American Division. And she was MV and Sabbath School leader there. So this was taken off of a group photo that has Arnold's parents in it because they were missionaries there also. Next. Sometimes it's hard to find some of these things. All right, we have some questions. We want you to place these events in order, numbering the oldest to the newest. What do you think happened first? The first JMV book. Go ahead.
First Young People's Society.
Mm-hmm. First Young
then-
People Society.
And then the book.
No. The reason we're doing this is because most of us don't know, do we?
Missionary
even
Volunteer Department.
Pardon me?
Missionary Volunteer Department.
No.
We're going to talk about all these things, but I just wondered how much you knew about it. What really happened first? The first Young People Society, 1879, we know that one, don't we? But what happened after that? What are some of the things that happened? I can tell you the first JMV handbook wasn't until 1929. The first vocational merits, which were later called vocational honors, which now AY honors, were 1928. The Missionary Volunteer Department, 1907. Friend class level. Now we call it investiture level now, but investiture was called class level. That's 1922. The MV Book Club, 1907. The Junior Bible Year, I'm pretty sure it was 1917. I have to look that up. But I just wanted you to have an idea so that as we go through this, you sort of get an idea what happened in the order that it happened, okay? Let's go to the next one.
Okay.
First MB Book Club that we talked about. Matilda Erickson wrote some of the books. You know, the MB Book Club was very difficult at first because there were very few Adventist writers. There were very few books for young people. None of the books had pictures. None of the books were really story form. Some of the books they were asked to read were books now that as adults were like, what? You asked juniors or primaries to read this age, you know, that type of a book. But that's the way it was in those days, and they actually did read them. So 1907 is when the MV Book Club started. Next. Standard of attainment. I don't know if you've ever heard about that before, but the standard of attainment was really the precursor to our guide and master guide. And it was teaching high morals, Christ-centered life, being involved. And they received a certificate when they had gone through it, like now we do an investiture. But that was the very basic of the beginning of our class levels. Next. Standard of attainment. I think we have a certificate here. So God leads his youth leaders. He always has. Remember we talked about in harvest and gathering that Jasper Wayne talked to Ellen White about, and it took till 1908 before the GC finally adopted that. I don't know if you ever did harvest and gathering, if you're old enough to have done it. Hispanic churches in North America still, many of them still do in gathering. Now on your tithe envelope, there's a little place for a lot of us that just says in gathering, and you put in an amount if you want to give. But it was an exciting thing when I was a kid to go door to door and share your faith and ask. Missionary Volunteer Day began, the MV, in 1908, the first one. The Morning Watch calendars came out. It was a picture, old Bible pictures, and then with that, a verse that they learned each day. And then the junior reading course came out in October of 1908. Next. So a lot of things happened way back then. They were very involved. Here's our junior reading course, some of the books that they read. Next. I remember how excited I was to receive my certificate for junior reading course certificate. This is one way before I was born, but that was given to us to share in the museum. But we want the people that were working for young people, all the leaders wanted young people to have good reading. I don't think we've changed that goal yet. Next. 1909. Junior Missionary Volunteers, JMV, began. Not until 1909. Before it was just MV for senior youth. Now we had something for junior youth, which is the beginning, the foundation for Pathfinders. JMV was for, you would say, 5th through 10th graders. And then around the world, they started JMV programs. But it was official in 1909. And you can see the plaque, well, it's more than a plaque, the monument there on the right. That monument was at Mount Vernon where JMV societies began. And when Mount Vernon Academy was sold, that huge, heavy monument became part of our Pathfinder Museum. And it's in storage in Michigan for us. Can't take it to Oshkosh, it's too heavy. It took a major equipment to get it moved and taken so we could have it. 1911, Tacoma Indians and Woodland Clan were organized in Maryland, and in Nebraska, Boys Pals. Now, why were there programs for boys? Now, I'm not picking on you guys. I happen to be married to one and I love you. But what happened is, in the good old days, 1911 was the year my father was born, so I know that's the good old days way back then. Girls, when supper was over and the dishes were done and it was nighttime, mom had them doing quilting, patching, patchwork. She had embroidering, tatting, whatever. But what did boys do? The cows were milked. There was nothing to do. And so boys seemed to get in mischief. And so that's why various people in different places started clubs for boys. And they were for boys only for a while. Of course, we wouldn't allow that anymore, would we? Next. I'm thankful for our first leaders that were willing to do something for young people. The MV leaflets began in 1911. They were little leaflets on very many different subjects. And it was exciting because you could open that up and get a quick overview of what you needed to do. There was one for master guides. They were for all kinds of leadership. How to start a Pathfinder Club later on came on. And German and Japanese reading courses began. Next, 1911, that's a long time ago. The Spanish work began in 1913. And by the way, I've been looking to see when the French work began, and I haven't found a date. You know, there must be one out there when they first started translating in French, but I haven't found that exact information yet. So if you know, you can share it with me. Morning watch calendars, that just you learn to the Bible texts, junior youth work, junior lesson societies, junior standard of attainment. Now remember, the standard attainment is the basic for what we call the investitures achievement now, the class levels. So this would be friend, companion in the beginning. That's all they had. Next. The senior Bible year began in 1915, and you received a certificate. This certificate's from, as you can see, is from 1924. We collect that type of thing because it helps us to remember that even though we're doing all kinds of new things, including Zoom, many things happened years and years ago, and God has truly blessed. Next. Missionary volunteer year work. I don't know if you realize it, but it was not until 1916 that the MV departments, union departments, became in existence. And it was in 1918 when the Senior Standing of Attainment was published, the workbook. They had it before, but they didn't have any information on it. And it was also when the seniors youth read testimonies. Have you read all the testimonies? I can say I haven't. I've read some. I have them, but that began in 1918. So there's information that we needed to learn and encourage. It was very definitely missionary minded back then. Next. 1917, the junior Bible year began. And of course, that's an older little leaflet, but it was a plan where the young people could read the Bible each day. I know some of our Pathfinder clubs here in North America, when they have unit time in their Pathfinder club, they actually read that together because they know they're not doing it at home anymore. And it's something to encourage, and the teens are better usually if they're involved in TLT program and involved in Pathfinders, they're being willing to commit themselves to read that. But we need to encourage our juniors. Next. Ella Edwards wrote the JMB Manual for Leaders. You know, the leaders had nothing. They were just out there with no materials at all. We send for stuff at Advent Source left and right, whatever we need. But they had nothing out there at first. And so Ella wrote some of the first things for leaders, trying to encourage them. Have you ever heard of Mission Scouts? Arthur Spalding started Mission Scouts in Tennessee. Now, he didn't do it purposely, willingly. He happened to have boys, and his boys wanted to join Boy Scouts. But he talked to them and explained why it wouldn't work. Their activities all day Sabbath, also the fact that the food that they would have, just, it wouldn't work for them. And so they wanted to go camping. And so he got a group of Seventh-day Adventist young people in the neighborhood because his boys encouraged him to, and started this club. And they called it Mission Scouts. He authored a pledge and law. And I call it the first pledge and law because it was changed just a little bit later when it became our official one. Thank you. As you can see, this says, by the grace of God, I will, you can read it there, I will keep the junior law. That's what it was called in those days. Now when we say, I will keep the Pathfinder law. But the law and pledge were authored by Spalding. But when he went in 1921 to the GC, he worked with Harriet Holt, and they changed a couple words, but basically they were the pledge and law and the ones we still use, which slight change. Thank you. Next. So Harriet Holt became the junior secretary, in other words, associate leader of the department in 1920, when her predecessor moved to enter America. The Friend class came along in 1922. Harriet Holt and Arthur Spalding wrote these classes. For Friend, for fifth graders. Next. 1922, that's something you need to remember. Also, Companion, and you can see that they had a scarf that matched, their pin that they had, everything was the color of the classwork, 1922. Next. Also, Comrade was written for the senior youth. This happens to be my husband's card from when he was a kid. And the next one is Master Comrade. Now you will read in some books, if you have an old book, that didn't start until way later. Some say 1931, some have other dates. But actually I have the copy of the minutes from the General Conference from the Youth Department, MV Department then, and they all started, those four classes started in 1922. Master Comrade, of course, is called what now? Master Guide. Another junior manual was written for the different workers, and Harriet Holt wrote that. She was a very prolific writer. The first Seventh-day Adventist junior camp was held in Australia, and I don't know if that's something you know. But it's interesting because so many people didn't think we needed to do those kind of fun things for young people. But Pastor Gilson in Australia felt very definite that it was important. And this is a picture of him preparing food for the kids. And he had this group of boys that went on that very first summer camp. Very small beginnings, but it's certainly grown from then. I hurt for all the camps that can't have summer camp this year. Next. (1926) is when the first North American Division camp was held. And a cute thing that I like about the history, the boys get the credit for the very first camp at Town Line Lake in Michigan. But according to Harriet Holt, the week before, the girls had their camp in Wisconsin. But somehow, because it wasn't out in the wilds, it was at the Wisconsin campground, it didn't get put in the records as the first. Just interesting. I like to see these little things that happen and research on them. Next. So Town Line Lake, Grover Faddick, it cost 50 cents to go to this camp out. And if you have an opportunity to read some of the stories about this camp, the difficulties, they borrowed a truck and tents and things from camp meeting. The conference wouldn't give them any money. I think they gave them a couple dollars is all. They had to come up with this all on their own. But Pastor Faddick really felt it was important that young people had this opportunity to camp together. The very first Pathfinder Club of record, 1927. Did you know that? Anaheim, Fullerton, Pathfinder churches got together, and John McKim started this Pathfinder Club. It started in their home, and Willis Dean was the first girls director. It wasn't very long before they outgrew his home, and because he was a janitor for the Orange County School District in Anaheim, California, he asked that could he use the school gym. And he was such a good janitor and did so many things for the school that they let him use the public school gym. And he had that Pathfinder Club there, and it grew very quickly with many non-Adventists. It became a real missionary Pathfinder Club. 1927, the very first of record. And I say the first of record because some people have written that it wasn't until 1946 that it began, etc. And that's not true. We have found proof in records that it started before. And they used the name Pathfinders. Guy Mann was the youth director there. His associate was Lawrence Skinner, who became the first world youth director in 1950 when Pathfinders went worldwide. And there's a really cute story about how the name Pathfinders came. And I'll try to tell it really, really quick because we'll run out of time. But when John McKim was working at the school district, every summer, all the janitors, and they weren't janitors like we know janitors now, they kept a workroom. There was no workrooms for teachers. They did all kinds of things that helped the teachers. They were really a partner in education. And they would go to the different schools in the summer, all of them together, and they would put a new roof on a building that needed it. They would go to another school and they would paint whatever needed, a refinished desk, whatever. And the one school that they went to was the Fremont School. And there was this plaque about John Fremont. And John Fremont was an explorer. And John Fremont was called the Pathfinder in the West. And so he liked this so well, the story. And John McKim told it so many times that his colleagues teased him and called him Mr. Pathfinder. And so that's where the term originally came from, the Pathfinder. 1928, C. Lester Bond came to the General Conference for the Junior Youth Director. And he was there till 1946. He was there a long time. He loved MV. He was called Mr. JMV. He just loved Junior Missionary Volunteers and Missionary Volunteers. He didn't want us to change the name to Pathfinders because he thought we'd lose the missionary of our work. Next, which of course we have in a lot of places. All our schools used to be missionary colleges and whatnot, and all the names have changed. Vocational honors came out in the first book in 1929, but they were written in 1928. And Harriet Holt and Arthur Spalding are the ones that put this together. And when C. Lester Bond came on the scene, he is the one that put them in a book. And he is credited doing the honors, but I have a letter from him saying, no, he did not start them. He put them in the book. But they got people, if you were a nurse, you maybe were asked to help with the home health one and different ones. They got individuals to help them. This is a copy of the first junior handbook that was written by C. Lester Bond. C. Lester Bond was very active in youth ministry for many years. I knew him later when I was, I was probably 11, 12 when I met him. And just a wonderful Christian man that from a huge family, and many of his family became missionaries. Henry Thomas Eliot, H.T. Eliot, was our GC youth director next in 1931. And that's when he highlighted at the General Conference session a investiture to highlight the fact that he wanted all of our youth directors, all the secretaries, all the workers in the General Conference and in local conferences to become master guides. And so someone thought, oh, that's when it started then. But no, it did not start then. It started 1922. Next. Pre-JMV class is what they were called. In 1930, they did Busy Bee. Of course, we call them adventure classes now. Next. Sunbeam was the next one for the second graders. I don't know how many of you have done those. That would have been a good question. By the way, these tiny old pins are actually mine, and you can see the changes on this scarf. And in those days, when we were invested, we got a new scarf each time. Next. And the reason they quit that, too expensive. They had a lot of large families in those days, and if you had to buy a new scarf every time, it added up pretty fast. Helping Hand also was 1930. And there's the pins there also. The second Pathfinder Club of Records started in Santa Ana, California. Actually, Iona and Lester Martin became the directors, but the Martins saw some kids that were really struggling, particularly some boys that were just getting a little rough and everything. They were in the city and they just felt they needed something. And they heard about the Pathfinder Club that was in Anaheim, not too many miles away. And so they wanted to start a club. But Santa Ana Church had no fellowship hall. They had no place to do anything. So they looked around at the church members and realized that Dr. Johnston and his wife had the largest home. So they went to them and asked them, would they be willing to help them do a club? And you saw the picture of the house there where they held it. And that was the Johnston's home. And in the shop, they taught the boys radio. That was the first class they taught because honors had just come out, if you remember. And the girls met up in the little attic area. I call it the fishbowl room, up on top, and did sewing and other things. Arthur Spalding, who had gone to the GC, wrote many books for young people and adults and was very definitely part of our honor system and Pathfinder clubs in general. Next. D.A. Oaks became the General Conference Youth Director, 31 to 34, and he's one of the persons that I'm really trying to research. When last time we were back at the General Conference, we hoped to go to the archives and learn more about some of these people and get their biographies, but they happen to be closed for remodeling, so we'll have to do it next time we go back. But we're always trying to learn. If you know anything about any of these people, you can help us. New honors were added all the time. 1933, there was a group of them added, excuse me. Next. Alfred W. Peterson came on 34 to 46. He was really there at the GC during the war years. And it was a rough time, but youth ministry still went forward. They didn't stop just because the wars were going on. In 1937, 10 additional honors were added. Like I say, they just kept going forward, finding things that would interest young people. Now, there's a lot of discussion about when the first club started and whatnot, but the third and fourth clubs of record are Glendale, California, 1937, and Lawrence Skinner went there, Elder Skinner went there as the youth director and started that club. He had been in Southeastern where the very first club had started in 1927. And then Loma Linda, California had a club in 1938. And we have proof of those, and there may be some others. So we say a record because we haven't found all the records yet. The first Master Comrade Manual was published in 1938. And it really helped leaders to know how to lead. Had lots of great information. The Junior Missionary Volunteer Handbooks that Strabon had written were updated regularly. There were new honors to add. There were new things going on that were very important for the leaders to know about. And we have a good collection of these books, and it's really interesting to see how God has led. Ideals for Junior was written by Silas Strabon. Also, the stamp collecting, that was one of his hobbies. And he was just trying to encourage young people to study God's word and to stay involved. Now, a lot of you have heard about Medical Cadet Corps, the MCC program, and why is it part of Pathfinder history? Well, after the war, many of the drill masters were just fresh out of the Army that led our young people. So when Pathfinder started, that's where we got our basics for our ministry and that. And MCC was the program that helped young people, Seventh-day Adventist, and it was mostly men in those days, to when they had to go in the service, because it was where you didn't have a choice. When you became a certain age, that's just what happened. And so they taught them first aid so they could go in as medics and that type of thing and not have to fight in the war. Vocational honors revisions, this is from 1938. There were a lot of revisions, a lot of additions, I should say, through the years. 1943 is when Elder Dunbar came as associate youth director till 1946. In 1946, he became the GC youth director till 1955. I knew Elder Dunbar, and I just need to tell one quick little story about him. I worked at Loma Linda University Medical Center, and he would come up, my boss just happened to be his son, Dr. Dick Dunbar, and he would come up to see him one day a week, and they'd go to lunch together. And when he'd come up, he'd come to the front desk where I was working, and we'd talk Pathfinders. And every now and then I would get a phone call from Elder Dr. Dunbar saying, Dixie, is my dad out there talking to you? I'm ready to go to lunch. But he was awesome. And I asked Elder Dunbar, I said, Elder Dunbar, what were your hobbies? What were you interested in? And he said, leading youth to Christ. That was his hobby. Wonderful, wonderful man. I miss him. Thank you. Next. Books and honors kept being written. A lot of active people. 1946. That's okay. Theodore Lucas came to the GC as an associate, MV department, and he is the one that designed the MV flag, and he was very proud of that flag. I met him in 1957 when I was 16. I shouldn't tell you that because now you know how old I am. Youth leaders had a lot of materials. The Heritage of Truth Manual for youth leaders, you really had to study. It was a college course. You had to know SDA history. Lot of work, but they were dedicated. They wanted to become missionary volunteers for God. Thank you. Next. Clark Smith, when he was younger, was the youth director for Nevada-Utah Conference. And he was involved with the MV Council that wrote the plans for Pathfinder program. And from there, he went to the General Conference. And we have a lot of his materials that his two daughters gave us that we have for the display. But he was very involved in youth ministry. Next. Some of these people you maybe never heard about. Character classics at Plata, reading The Spirit of Prophecy was something for senior youth. But I think it's important that we realize that it wasn't just for the senior youth, it was for the leaders too, so that you could enhance your spiritual life. Next. In 1946, Elder John Hancock was the pastor at the Anaheim Seventh-day Adventist Church, and he was asked to come to the conference and be the youth director at the conference. And he started the 5th Pathfinder Club of Record. And if any of you have some of the old books, the Pathfinder story he himself wrote in 1994, was published in 1994, he said that it was the very first conference-sponsored Pathfinder Club. It wasn't true. He got the materials from his office in the files about the other clubs and started it. But he was an awesome person. He designed our Pathfinder emblem. He played his accordion. If you were old enough to have been able to listen to him play it, we called him Uncle John. We were good friends. He asked me to call him John, and I says, Elder Hancock, I can't do that. I wasn't trained to call pastors by their first name. But he said, okay, call me Uncle John. That's what the kids call me at summer camp. Picture on the left was taken at Idlewild, California, at Southeastern California camp. Next. So this club started, and actually a senior ministerial student from La Sierra College, Francis Hunt, was the director. But it was a good start, and whenever we celebrate how many years since Pathfinding, Southeastern California Conference does their celebration 1946 to whatever year, where the rest of us, it became official in 50, so we celebrate from there. But the reason is because the first club director, John McKim, died in 1944. So there were several years where there weren't any clubs, official clubs. And so they started up official again in 1946, and that club is still going strong. He designed our Pathfinder emblem. The original one was sort of a maroon with a gold sword. It didn't have the blue sword. That changed through the years. But that emblem means a lot to us. Let's talk about what it means. Do you know what the emblem means, or is it just something you put on your uniform and you're not aware of? There's 3 sides. Completeness of the Godhead. The mental, physical, and spiritual. And when Elder Hancock first wrote this, the mental, physical, and spiritual part of Pathfinders is why he made it the triangle. He put himself through college designing emblems for companies, and he actually did funnies. Had a funny strip that he wrote for years that were in California newspapers that he put himself through academy and college drawing. So later, Elder Hancock designed from clear up till 1980 all of our Pathfinder honors, our honor patches. Next. Let's see the rest of the meaning. The shield, God's protection. And I think it's very important that we remember that. I don't think our kids know what this means. I think your teens could do a really cool play with illustrating what it means. Next. The sword. It's represented by the Bible. The sword is used in warfare Take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God. We need to let our kids know what all this is about. Next. I think sometimes we just don't stop to think what it means. What does red stand for? Sacrifice. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son. Sacrifice for red. Next. What does white stand for? We all know that. Purity. We desire to have purity and righteousness of Christ's life in our lives. Revelation 3:5. We shall be, same shall be clothed in white raiment. Can't wait. Next. Blue. Blue stands for loyalty. For a friend. That's why our friend class is blue. True blue friend. It's the purpose of the Pathfinder Club to teach us to be loyal to God, heaven, our parents, and our church. Exciting to think what all that means. What's the gold for? Well, we know gold stands for excellence, doesn't it? It's a standard of measurement. And we hope that your Pathfinder ministry has high standards to build character for the kingdom of heaven. That's what it's all about. It's ministry. Remember that. It's not just a club, it's ministry. Another friend of ours was Elder Berg. We called him Uncle Henry and his wife Aunt Marion, dear friends for many years. He offered a little booklet, how to start a Pathfinder Club, this tiny little booklet. And he also did many other things. Let's see if, as we move forward, if it tells some more of the things that he has done. He asked someone to, actually a coordinator, to do a Pathfinder flag. She wasn't a seamstress, so she had a friend, Helen Hobbs, sew the first flag. And they decided what they wanted it to be. What would the background be? What colors would it be? They made that up. His only prerequisite was that it would have the Pathfinder emblem in it. This particular flag is not the first one. I wish we had that one. This one was made by a 16-year-old boy. Of course, you bought the material and sewed the back, and then the lettering and the MV was all done by him in felt. And he gave us that flag, and it was flown in 1948. Also, in 1948, Elder Berg started the coordinator program. Why did he need that? Well, he started 23 new Pathfinder clubs in Central California Conference that year. And so he needed coordinators. You can't do that all alone. As you coordinators know, you can't be everywhere at once. 1948, area coordinators. Pathfinder Leadership Camp in 1949, Elder Hancock had this youth camp. And it was the first Pathfinder Leadership Camp of record, 1949. Now we have them regularly, not always on Zoom, fortunately. This was held in Central California Conference. And God gives us a song. The Pathfinder song was written in 1949. Oh, we are the Pathfinders strong, the servants of God of we, faithful as we march along in kindness, truth, and purity. God gave Elder Berg that song and the music, actually. Next. Clark Smith worked that day. Now, let me just give a little background to this. In 1947, 48, Elder Skinner had gone to the General Conference as a youth director, and he had been in Southeastern where it all began. And so he was talking to Elder Dunbar and Elder Lucas, explaining to them how important he thought it was that we have Pathfinder Club ministry, that we do something. And so the General Conference called and asked J.R. Nelson, who was the Union Youth Director for the Pacific Union, to get his MV Council together and put down what they're doing, because all these different conferences were doing Pathfinders, but it was all a little bit different. And so he asked them to put down what they were doing And they got together at different conferences. This particular time they were in Nevada, Utah conference, and they split them up in groups. And Clark Smith and Henry Berg worked on the drill manual. Clark Smith was a military man. He knew very well how to do the drill. Henry Berg wanted to keep it kind. And so it's for Pathfinders. It's not just military. Wanted to keep it kind. And so they worked together on that first little brochure. Next. Ministry evangelism was so important at the beginning. I don't think we do near enough evangelism. If you've ever been to South America, where Pathfinders just has exploded everywhere, it grows so fast because they're doing evangelism all the time. And I think that's something that we need to think about, getting our young people involved. Lawrence Paulson represents a lay person, and many lay people that we have, including a lot of you and myself, that have put countless hours working for Pathfinder Youth through the years. Lawrence became a good friend of ours in his later years, and we have many items that he has given us that we have been able to share in the museum from the beginnings of Pathfinders. He was part of it. Next. One of the things that Lawrence Paulson did was teach Master Comrade classes. Basically, if you were in the conference in any position, janitor, president, whatever, you took these classes and became invested in Master Guides. It was very important that everyone knew how to work with young people. Next. One of the exciting things for me was seeing the pictures from hundreds of individuals being invested in 1949 as Master Guides from classes that Lawrence Paulson had taught. And it was interesting because the front row was dignitaries. They invested the first row. That row turned around and invested the next row and the next row and the next row. And that's how they did it so quickly and made it so special. God sent not only Pathfinder songs, but lots of other songs for young people. And the Missionary Volunteer Songbook. Some of you maybe even have seen some of these books. Next. And like I've said, evangelism was so important. John Hancock wrote music, and one of the songs that he wrote was, I'll share my faith. I'll share my faith with others on Lifeway. I'll share my faith. There's no time for delay. When Jesus calls for volunteers, hasten to obey. I'll share my faith every day. If you haven't heard that song, you should look it up and find it and learn that. But Share Your Faith became a very important evangelistic program. Pathfinders love being involved in that type of thing. Next. The Pathfinder Drill Manual was updated. In one of the papers, it listed that Clark Smith and Harry Garlick wrote that first drill manual. And Harry Garlick was the Associate Youth Director for 23 years for the Pacific Union Conference. And he called me one day and he said, Dixie, can you get that changed? I was not old enough to have written that manual when it first started, but I did help with updating it. So drill taught Pathfinders to listen, which is very important, to follow commands and work together. It's really important that we all work together. And by the way, in the good old days, and I don't know what you're doing in Ontario Conference and at other places around the world, but in the good old days, when they did drill, the staff were all part of it. You didn't stay and watch the kids. You were part of that. You learned also. Of course, I took MCC in Academy. That was required. So I had it up on that one. The Advanced Honors, 1949. And originally, when the honors came out, they had an embroidered star on them. Now, of course, we put our little star on when we've earned them, which saves a lot of money because you don't have to have 2 honors for everything. Next. In 1949, in the Autumn Council, which was held in San Francisco, where the GC was going to be held, where they vote what they're going to bring forward to the people, a young man 19 years old, a school teacher by the name of Eliezer Melendez, who ended up becoming a dear friend of ours, heard about the Pathfinder Club, that they were going to give this information at GC in 1950. Now, he went home to Puerto Rico and started the first Spanish club of record and the first club in the Inter-American division. And Elder Melendez ended up later on becoming the youth director for Inter-American division. Wonderful friend, we're missing him. Like so many of our pioneers, we're gone to our rest. Next. I keep trying to hit click to go on and forget I can't do that. So in 1950 at the GC, Pathfinders GC session, Pathfinders became official. At Oshkosh, his last camporee, there was a gentleman there that came and talked to me. And I talked to him before, and he said, did I ever tell you that in 1950, I was on the drill team that presented on the stage part of the Pathfinder ministry in 1950. How exciting to be part of that as a young kid. That was great that he shared it with us. Next. Okay, we're going to do some more fun. We want you to match the year with the event. Some of these things we just talked about, maybe all of them. See if you can match them. Pledge and Law, JMV, the conference approved it for the World Field, Pathfinder Song, the flag, and the Junior Bible Year. Okay, next. You can tell some of these stories to your young people. If you get the Pathfinder story and read that, that's something you can really share. Now, Pathfinder uniform originally for the girls was a dress. It was not the green that we use later. It was a lighter green, but I've noticed different colors of green that were made in the dresses. And most of the dresses were handmade from home. And the sash and the scarf. And of course, the scarf was the color of what you'd earned. If you were a friend, you wore blue. And if you were a companion, you wore red, and changed it when you earned another level. Next. By the way, you see those saddle shoes she's wearing? That black shoes didn't become part of the uniform until a little bit later. And the boys wore tan with the green sash and the black tie. All wore ties and the black belt and socks and shoes.
And because of the Army.
Elder Skinner had gone to the General Conference in 1946 as Associate Youth Director, which was working with junior youth. And when Pathfinders went worldwide in 1950, he became the first World Pathfinder Director. And Elder Skinner was a dear, dear man, a praying man, and an awesome person. He collected coins as he traveled the world, and was just a real spiritual man who loved young people and worked with them. And we're blessed that he laid the foundation for so many other young people to come along and be in ministry. Next. Remember, Elder Skinner was before that in Southeastern California Conference where it all began. The first Pathfinder Fair of Record has been listed as incorrect through the years, but we found that there was one October 22, 1950 in Sanitarium Hall in St. Helena. And I'm looking for pictures. We hope that someday someone was there that will find some old pictures and share with us. The second Pathfinder of Record, next, was held at Linwood Academy in the Academy Auditorium. And there were 1,000 people at that one. The Pathfinder Fair that was thought for many years as the first one was actually the third, but the first in Central California Conference. And Elder Dunbar was at that camporee as a representative from the General Conference, and also at the next one the following weekend in Glendale for Southern California Conference. The first World Pathfinder Staff Manual was published in '51. And it looked a lot different than our staff manuals now. This one belonged to Elder Paulson, Lawrence Paulson. The Master Comrade changes. Master Comrade was changed to Master Guide. And it was changed because of the problems in Europe, Russia, whatnot. The name Comrade was not one we wanted to be associated with, and so they changed it to Master Guide. What year was it changed? 1950. Though I will say that conferences were allowed till 1951 to use up their supplies. So Arnold was invested as Master Comrade in 1951, my husband. Just a little bit of history so you know the changes. MV handbooks, as I said before, were revised time and time again, adding the new honors, adding new things that were important to leadership. Next. Dorcas Scouts. I don't know if you've ever heard that term, but it started in 1951, an idea of giving instead of getting on Halloween. And Wisconsin liked that Minnesota idea so well that they took it the next year and they called it can collecting. And I don't know if you're doing that in your area, but around the North American division, many collect cans and foods and even clothing and money that they share with their food pantries and whatnot, or their community service. Junior Guide magazine started in 1953. It was a magazine for juniors, their own. In fact, I have every issue of #1 year because my parents gave me for my birthday a subscription to the Junior Guide magazine. And it was something we loved to read. And if it was important, it was going to be in Junior Guide. Next. Singing Youth was a magazine that was published also, a songbook that was published in 1953. And you maybe have that one. Lots of great songs in it. And the one on the left here, as you're looking at it, shows about the Youth Congress that happened in 1953 also. And they had given that out at Youth Congress. We have one of the original ones because Arnold was at that Youth Congress. MV Legion of Honor was for this senior youth, and it was a commitment to high standards of living. And many young people took the MV Legion of Honor to heart and later became missionaries. Next. The first ever Pathfinder Camporee. That's been listed wrong in books also. In fact, years ago, I was back in northern New England doing leadership seminars, and I was talking about the first camporee that happened in 1954 in California, and it was the first ever record. And a pastor who was there as a Pathfinder director came up to me afterwards and told me about the one at Camp Winnipeg. And I said, awesome, I love hearing these news stories and getting this information. Can you send me proof? And here it was. It was in the Junior Guide, and it was in the Atlantic Union Gleaner, which is their youth paper. So the very first camporee was at Camp Winnipeg in Southern New England Conference. Next. The second camporee is the one, and the reason that they thought they were the first is because the youth directors from the Pacific Union had coined the phrase camporee. Before, everyone was calling it jamboree, but they didn't want to keep the terms from Boy Scout. They wanted their own term, and God gave them the term camporee. But you know how the Adventist circle is? It's like everybody heard that information, and so when they did their camporee back in Atlantic Union, they changed the name from jamboree very quickly, and we have papers proving that have been shared with us that shows when they changed from jamboree to camporee. So we call it Pathfinder Camporees nowadays. Thank you. MV Voice of Youth was very important. It was junior youth given by youth for youth. Very important for young people to have the opportunity to share. Fireside evangelism is another one that was used, youth Bible study teams, and you can see as you look at this history how important evangelism was to our Pathfinder clubs and to our ministry. Next. Leadercraft course is a 10-hour course for training MV Society officers, which means a 10-hour leader course that you would take to be part of ministry. Next. The very first club of record in South America was held in Miraflores, Peru, and youth director Don Pampoli got one of the secretaries, Nercida de Ruiz, to be the first club director. And Nercida was a soft-spoken, wonderful person. We met her a number of times at Pathfinder Camporees in South America, and such a wonderful leader. That's when they started. 51's when they started. When did Explorer class level come? You think it's been there forever, but it hasn't. When do you think it came on? 1956. It was for 7th graders. 1956 Explorer. You can tell your young people that. There again, pictures of junior guide. If it was important, it was in junior guide. It was important for junior youth. Thank you. Next. I know we're going fast. Time goes so fast, but there's so much that I'd like to share with you. I hate not being in person where we can move around and do some activities together and things, but I want to give you as much information as I can. JMV Pathfinder Day started in 1957, and hopefully you do that. Next. This is a picture of celebrating missionary volunteers for 50 years. On the left of the picture is Milton Kern, H.T. Elliott, A.W. Peterson, E.W. Dunbar, and Ted Lucas. And they were the leaders for the first 50 years in youth ministry for the General Conference. Handbooks kept changing, manuals were updated. Very important to keep information updated. Uniform changes. Excuse me. Pathfinder uniform is 1957 to 1985, and the ones there on the left of the boy and the girl. Those are actually our oldest grandchildren. Our oldest granddaughter has 3 boys, and our oldest grandson, the one on the right, is much taller than she is now, has 2 boys. But this is what was worn in North America. Now, it might have been a little different in Canada because some of the changes came a little slower, but the teen girls all wore the white tops, and in Southeastern California Conference, they still do. And you can't wait to stay in the ministry of Pathfinders and become a teen and become really involved and learning leadership. Thank you. Next. The advanced classes came on in 1958, and it's interesting, they were called Frontier Friend, we call it Trail Friend now, Campfire Companion, Range Explorer, Trail Finder Guide. So of course the terminologies have changed through the years, but those are the bars they earn for doing the advanced levels. And when we taught them in our Pathfinder Club, we taught them right along with the regular curriculum, and they didn't even know they were doing it. We did it as we were camping and doing our activities. First ever Union Pathfinder Camporee was held at the North Pacific Union in Snoqualmie National Forest in Washington State. A dear friend of ours, Faye Zigley, was one of the Pathfinder leaders that was there, and she's given us a pennant from that camporee, and she said it cost 50 cents to go to that camporee. And there were over 1,000 Pathfinders there. It was a biggie. The second camporee was held in the Pacific Union. Next, Lone Pine. I was at that one. Pathfinder clubs grew. They became huge. I don't know about your area, but I know in our area, clubs that used to be 100, 150, or maybe 35, 40 now. That's really changed. And the ministry hasn't changed. We just somehow, because of all the electronics and everything that's out there, we're losing it. The Junior Teen Counselor Program was written in 1962 by Norm Middag, and when he was in Northern California Conference. And later, the Teen Leadership Program was written by a teenager, a young boy, and later added much to it by our current NAD Youth Director, Tracy Wood. We've worked on that for years. Pathfinder Team. The field guide was written in 1962 to help us with our outings and to know safety and to have a good time. And if you are fortunate enough to find an old copy of that, it's great reading, even if the pictures are black and white inside. Thank you. Pathfinder Staff Training Course. This is something I'd like you to really think about. The original course was 60 hours. We sort of complain about a 10-hour leadership. There were 10 hours in basic leadership, 10 hours of club administration, 10 hours of drill and marching. You really knew how to drill after 10 hours, let me tell you. 10 hours of field games, 10 hours of MV honors, and 10 hours of nature and camping. It was extensive leadership, extensive leadership. But we pared that down for many reasons. Eager Beaver was started in Southeastern California Conference, written by Janet Mallory, who was our president's wife at that time, and was a great program for kindergarten. Pioneer Class. Do you know what Pioneer Class is? Well, it became Ranger in 1970, but it began in 1966 called Pioneer. Why did we change the name? Actually, a lot of the world didn't. It's still called Pioneer in Central America and in South America and other places. But we changed it because there again, it was a political move. Pioneer name was not a name that we wanted to be associated with at that time. It's funny how things like that happen through the years. There were booklets for the young people to work on. Elder, that's okay, go ahead. Elder Leo Ranzelin became the third World Pathfinder Director. Elder Ranzelin is a dear friend of ours. Leo is just an awesome, awesome person. And here's a picture of him with the second World Pathfinder Director, John Hancock. So that's why I don't feel so bad about being so old, because I got to know all these guys personally. The 25th anniversary for Pathfinders, remember, in a lot of places, it was celebrated 25 years between 71 and 75, depending on when you actually started. 25 years, God really blessed. Next. Missionary Volunteers, MV, was changed to AY, Adventist Youth, in 1979. And Elder Hancock designed the AY emblem in 1979. JMV, Junior Missionary Volunteers, was changed to AJY, Adventist Junior Youth, also in 1979. That's the time when our colleges and our schools, different places, dropped the missionary from their name. Pre-JMV was changed to pre-AJY. Should be another picture there. There, and that's what their scarf looked like for adventures originally. The Adventure Connection, pre-kindergarten through 4th grade. Now, of course, you know they've gone even younger. It's family ministry. It's not a mini Pathfinder Club, but it's families learning with a purpose to be closer together. Not structured like Pathfinders at all. It's fun and games. Adventist Youth logo that Elder Hancock designed was a special logo that was more modern for the Adventist Youth of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Next. 1979. After 70 years of youth ministry, it continues. 70 years, can you believe that? There are more than 3 million Pathfinders in more than 170 countries. Wow, how God is blessed. Our first leaders would have no idea. There's more than 400 honors worldwide, way more than any of us can ever do. And the mission to take the message of Jesus Christ around the world is a reality due partly to Pathfinder ministry. Pastor Tracy Wood is the youth director for the North American division. Pastor Tracy, before he went there, was a youth director here in Oregon. So we know Tracy and Angelina personally, and wonderfully God-loving Christian adults that are working to lead youth to Christ. Next. Our associate youth director, which is for junior youth, which is Club Ministries, Armando Miranda. And Armando is just phenomenal too, and has a wonderful family, 2 boys and a little girl. And they're such a blessing to ministry. We are so blessed to have them as part of ministry. You are a part of history. You are making history. And now that I have a moment, because I wasn't sure if I would, I want to go back and tell you about the Pathfinder song, because I think that's something that our young people need to know about. We need to know how God is blessed, and we need to know the importance of what we do. I spoke earlier just a little bit about the MV Council, how J.R. Nelson, Joseph Nelson got his Pacific Union youth guys together, and they called them the MV Council. And they sat around the tables and they worked on writing the little booklet, How to Start a Pathfinder Club, updating it. They wrote the Pathfinder drill manual. They worked on a lot of different things. And one day when they were around the tables working in groups, Elder Hancock turned to his friend Henry Berg and he said, "Henry, you should write a Pathfinder song." And Henry said, "John, I can't even read music. I don't write music. You're the musician. You write the song." And for some reason, and we don't really know why, but Elder Hancock said, "No, Henry, I think you should write the song." Well, if you're like me, if it's something you can't do, you sort of shrug your shoulders and say, "Well, sorry, that's something I can't do." And that's basically what Elder Hancock did. But then a few weeks later, maybe a month or so later, he was driving to a meeting where he was going to speak, and he was thinking about, I can't write a song, but maybe I could write a poem that somebody could put to music. And so he thought about it and thought about the pledge and law and thought about things that God has done for us. And he pulled off the side of the road, pulled out this paper from his Bible and turned it over. It was the evangelistic tract, turned it over and wrote the words God gave him. "Oh, we are the Pathfinders strong, the servants of God are we, faithful as we march along, in kindness, truth, and purity." He wrote the whole song out, and he thought to himself, "Well, that's not bad. Maybe somebody can put music to my poem." He went and preached, and on the way home, and I know in a book it's written differently, but I have his biography that he's given me, many pages of his life history, and he said on the way home, he's thinking about that poem and thinking, I'm going to send it to a friend and see if he can put music to it. And then he started humming, da 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 da. And he thought, I wonder what that music is. I don't remember ever hearing my wife play it on the piano or the girls on their instruments. Da 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 da. I wonder if my poem would fit that. And so he sang, "Oh, we are the Pathfinders strong." And he sang it all the way through. And what Uncle Henry told me many times was he sang it all the way home because he's afraid he'd forget it. And he actually pulled off to the side of the road again and turned that paper over and put some lines, because even if you don't read music, there's dots where the notes would be. And he tried to put it, and he ran in the house, and "Marion, sweet Marion, please play this for me." And she went, da, 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 blank, blank, blank. It just didn't sound right. And she said, "Henry, sing it." And so he sang the song, and she put the dots where they belong so that we have the music we have. And he sent that song to his friend at the Voice of Prophecy and said, "What would you change?" And they sent it back and said, "Don't change anything. God gave you that song. He gave you the words and he gave you the music." So tell your Pathfinders leaders, tell your Pathfinders that we have a God-given ministry. God loves us so much that he has protected us all these years. And thank you for listening. I'll tell you one more thing. If you want to hear some more of my stories, Advent Source has a book, A Pathfinder Journey. that I've written a lot of the stories, some of them that we've told or touched on that you might like to get, that you can share with your Pathfinders so that they can know the ministry. Thank you.